right, everyone, settle in. Roll cameras, and action! I want full steam from the locomotive as it crosses the bridge.
The tragic genius who invented spaceflight and was mocked for it. Discover how Robert Goddard's secret 1926 rocket launch changed everything. If you think NASA invented liquid-fueled rockets, you need to watch this. Modern rockets weigh millions of pounds and burn tons of propellant, but their ancestor was a flimsy metal frame launched from an Auburn cabbage patch. In this video, we explore the solitary blueprint of Robert Goddard, an American physicist who faced public humiliation from the New York Times, moved his lab to the desert in Roswell, and developed the exact technology later used by Wernher von Braun and Sergei Korolev. What you'll learn: the 1920 NYT Scandal, why the world's biggest newspaper called Goddard a high school failure; the Roswell Secrets, how Goddard developed gyroscopic steering and regenerative cooling in total isolation; the global theft, how Germany and the USSR used Goddard's 214 patents to beat the US into space; the $1 million apology, the US government's eventual recognition of his genius.
Modern rockets weigh millions of pounds and burn tons of propellant every second to slip the grip of Earth's gravity. But the ancestor to every one of those leviathans was a flimsy metal frame that coughed its way 40 feet above a frozen cabbage patch. Curious. Back in the early 1900s, serious people didn't talk about spaceflight. The idea of leaving the atmosphere belonged entirely to the pages of science fiction magazines and authors like H.G. Wells. Over in Europe, brilliant mathematicians like Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Hermann Oberth were actually working out the orbital equations, but they were treating rocketry as a thought experiment on paper, not something you'd build in a workshop. Robert Goddard was different. An American physicist with a quiet demeanor, Goddard looked at those equations and decided he was going to weld the actual hardware needed to reach the vacuum of space. Getting off the planet required someone willing to step out of the chalkboard theory and into the dangerous, explosive reality of testing real engines. In 1919, Goddard published a dense, mathematical treatise on extreme altitudes. Tucked at the very end was a casual calculation suggesting a rocket could hit the moon with flash powder. The public reaction was immediate and vicious. In January 1920, the New York Times ran a scathing editorial. They declared that Goddard lacked the basic knowledge doled out daily in high schools, mocking his claim that a rocket could push against the vacuum of space. The humiliation deeply scarred him. He was a serious scientist being treated like a carnival barker. So he packed up his equipment, stopped talking to the press, and locked his research away. The very technology that would eventually take humanity to the stars was now being forged in an environment of absolute paranoid isolation. Driven out of Massachusetts by noise complaints and fire marshals, Goddard secured funding from the Guggenheim family, with a major push from aviation hero Charles Lindbergh, and moved his entire operation to the remote, sun-baked plains of Roswell, New Mexico. Solid gunpowder couldn't lift heavy payloads into orbit, so Goddard engineered a new system, plumbing highly volatile liquid oxygen and gasoline together into a combustion chamber to generate sustained, massive thrust. To keep the rocket flying straight, he designed this system: movable fins placed directly inside the violent 3,000-degree exhaust stream, all linked to a mechanical gyroscope in the nose. When the gyroscope detected the rocket leaning off course, it would command those vanes to tilt slightly, deflecting the thrust and correcting the vertical attitude in real time. He also faced the massive problem of his early rocket engines overheating and completely melting themselves into useless pools of molten slag. His fix was regenerative cooling, pumping the freezing liquid fuel through cavities in the engine walls to chill the metal before injecting it into the combustion chamber. Down in the desert, Goddard had mapped out the entire architecture required for spaceflight, but he kept his findings tightly guarded, sharing them with almost no one outside his tiny crew. That secrecy became his greatest bottleneck. By refusing to collaborate with universities or outside engineers, he was stuck solving every single mechanical failure by himself, while obsessively filing over 200 patents to protect his work. Meanwhile, those patents were public record. Across the Atlantic, his early moon rocket headlines had sparked a massive space fad in the Soviet Union. His ambition became a rallying cry for young, aggressive engineers. One of those engineers was Sergei Korolev. He closely studied the liquid fuel methodology out of New Mexico and eventually scaled those exact concepts into a massive state-sponsored space program. Over in Germany, military rocketeers were running into dead ends. They turned directly to Goddard's published patents, analyzing his blueprints to bypass years of trial and error. Under the leadership of Wernher von Braun, the German military took Goddard's isolated desert experiments, the turbopumps, the blast vanes, the gyroscopes, and rapidly industrialized them for war. It was a bitter irony. Goddard's paranoia cut him off from the resources of the American scientific community, while his detailed patent filings handed his breakthroughs to international rivals. When World War II broke out, Goddard offered his services to the U.S. military. They saw no value in ballistic missiles and sidelined his genius, assigning him to build minor, jet-assisted takeoff mechanisms for naval airplanes. But the terrible validity of his research was soon raining down on London and Antwerp. The Germans had successfully weaponized the liquid-fueled rocket. In 1945, the U.S. military finally called Goddard in. They brought him to inspect captured German V-2 hardware to understand how the superweapon worked. Peering inside the towering engine bay, he saw his own life's work staring back at him. The regenerative cooling jackets, the exhaust vanes, the gyroscopic steering. The V-2 was an exact, lethal copy of the rockets he had flown in Roswell. The mathematical dreams of reaching the cosmos had been physically realized. But their first global application wasn't exploration, it was destruction. Robert Goddard died of throat cancer in August 1945. He passed away on the cusp of an era he spent 3 decades trying to jumpstart. When Sergei Korolev launched Sputnik 12 years later, the Soviet vehicles rested squarely on the foundation of Goddard's 214 patents. And when the United States mobilized its resources, the colossal Saturn rockets carrying Apollo astronauts to the lunar surface utilized the exact same liquid fuel principles. The U.S. government quietly acknowledged this debt in 1960, paying his widow a massive $1 million settlement for patent infringement. 9 years later, as Apollo 11 sped toward the moon, the New York Times finally printed a retraction of their 1920 editorial. The sprawling, multi-billion-dollar state industries that conquered the vacuum of space didn't invent the machinery to get there. They just scaled up the stubborn, solitary blueprints of a physicist in the desert.
Hi everyone, if you like this content, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and follow for good content.
This is a true collaboration between human and machine. Elevate your perspective.